Good morning to one and all. Welcome back to the 7th semester. In this 7th semester, you have an application part of environmental engineering subject. Mainly, whatever the concepts that you have studied in the case of water supply and treatment engineering, wastewater engineering that you are studying in the current semester, that is municipal and industrial wastewater engineering, whatever the elective that you have studied, you have some sort of an application. That application is being gone through the aid or the usage of the tools or the equipments or an apparatus. Based upon the theoretical concepts, practicality aspects are to be taken for considerations, because whatever the problems that we are going to face in the society, either it may be related to any sorts of an environmental systems. Therefore, let us get to know the meaning of environmental engineering laboratory. Why they have kept only the environmental engineering, why not the water laboratory, wastewater laboratory, or air, or maybe the solid waste laboratory, like that? Because mainly environmental engineering comprises of different environmental systems. Let us get to know one by one. So today's topic concern, it is mainly related to introduction about the laboratory. Why you require a lab, why there is a necessity, what are the things that you are going to grasp the concepts and application for the laboratory practices, and if at all, if the treatment has to be given or any designing considerations, if you take in the case of water treatment or in the case of the wastewater treatment, definitely you need to have a measuring suitable devices. With this, environmental engineering has broadly divided into 14 major categories, but major thing it is, I will go for listing only 4 to 5 categories, that is all. So what are those? Mainly, if you are going to take with respect to the water environmental systems, okay, water quality, everything. And then if you are going to take with respect to the wastewater, this is a sub part of the classification, we have the wastewater. So water, mainly you have come across streams, ponds, lakes, rivers, oceans. These are categorized as a surface water resources. Groundwater resources may be infiltration galleries, infiltration wells, bore well, or what we call it as a tube well, and a normal open well or dug well. These are the categories that we are going to utilize it. What is the problem that you are going to face in a society? And in what sense this environmental lab is required in a complete manner for a civil engineer? Obviously, if you go for taking any sorts of practices, maybe for design mix of the concrete, or maybe if you wanted to go for a large scale group of the constructions, storage buildings or apartments, or maybe any other commercial buildings, or maybe even the hospitality also, each and every aspect it requires the material. So what kind of the material that you are going to use? I think you might have come across in the building materials and constructions and so on in your elective classes also. But water is an essential part for the sustainment of living organisms. Without water, no living organisms tend to exist, especially the multicellular organisms. Now, if I am going to categorize the environmental engineering into a broad classification, we mainly come across water quality, that is water supply, and wastewater and its treatment also, mainly treatment. We also come across in the environmental engineering the classification related to the land pollution. Land pollution, in the sense we also categorize either the land pollution which is being caused due to the presence of the solid waste or the waste disposal. How to quantify it? Next, if we are going to take again in the case of the land pollution itself only, land degradation, submerging part of the land area, the indirect effects that we are going to study across for it. So therefore water, land also. Next thing we also come across air environment. Air environment, some of you might have taken the air pollution and control as an elective. There you might have come across the particulate matter, respirable dust particles, so primary and the secondary pollutants, how to quantify them. Okay, with respect to the air environmental systems, we call it as atmospheric systems. Atmospheric systems. Now, we have gone through the water, land, air environment. How does the air gets polluted? We also have a certain types of the contaminants that are being generated due to the various industrial activities, residential activities and commercial activities. These residential, commercial or industrial or any sorts of an activities, if you are going to take it or consider it, it has a waste that is being generated as a byproduct. How to solve the crisis when the byproduct is being generated? How to manage it? How to convert into the useful resources? That is a major question as well as a challenge for each and every sort of an citizens in our country. Now if you go for taking the air environment, we go for seeing the effects of lake acidification due to the acid rain, or maybe the abrasion or deposition of the contaminants over the surface of the buildings causing the corrosion as well as abrasion also. So counter reactions that is being taking place, number 3, and this kind of the system has an impact both upon the plant, animals and even the vegetation also. Next set of an environmental systems in related to the air, whatever the space is concerning, we call it as a noise environment. Noise environment. How the noise is being generated? So you know the undesirable sound which is being coming across in due to the any of the vibration of the objects that is reaching more than 80 decibel, we call it as a sound. So in turn that we call it as a noise. Therefore, for noise environmental systems, how it is being categorized and quantified. So these both together we call it as an atmospheric type of the system. Another set of the conditions where the environmental engineering, it also deals with respect to the microbial systems. Microbial systems and climate change and mitigation. Climate change and mitigation, and mainly it goes for environmental impact assessment. Environmental impact assessment. What is related to the microbial systems? You might have come across the microbial flora as well as the fauna. Study related to that concept also, how it has been impaired, and that we call it as in ecological systems. Study with related to the water in respect to the microbial or maybe a macrobial systems, we call it as aquatic systems. That is why we have a separate part of the subject. When you go for studying in the aquatic system, you come across the lentic as well as the lotic part of the system. Moving on to the climatic change mitigation. Obviously, in today's part of the concern, you can see the various sorts of the statistical data pertaining to the global warming and climatic change conditions, impact of all the industries. It may be starting from the mining industries or maybe for any other developmental projects. So, each and everything has something to do with respect to the environment, because we are going for the utilization of the resources. If the resources are to be utilized, it should be in an optimal condition. If it is not in the optimal condition, therefore, then imbalance in the nature is being created. When the imbalance in the nature is created, thereby it go for affecting all the sort of the things. Ultimately affect whom? If you are going to question it, the effect is mainly based on the environment itself only. So, if you see the exploitation as one thing, man who going to exploit it, in turn he going to get sort of an diseases and then imbalances, natural imbalances, finally failure in mitigation. Of pollution. Okay. So, with respect to the ecological systems, I have stated that microbial system, it may be the study related to the fungi, bacteria, virus, worms and all. If you are going to take in the case of the climatic change mitigation, we have some of the software tools or the techniques, how the climate has been changing, and you need to get on all this sort of the data. This environmental engineering laboratory, which is being kept for your part of an curriculum or a syllabus, mainly deals with respect to the analysis of water as well as the wastewater and suggestion for the treatment system. Okay? But slight changes have been made. You need to be exposed for the land pollution quantification, air and as well as the noise environment. Hope so we have a demonstration for this. We call it as a demonstration or a demo experimentation. Mainly we deal with respect to the conduction part. So, these are the broad range of the categories. In addition to this, we also have monitoring of sites, monitoring, and therefore risk assessment we call it as, where I have mentioned ecological system, we have in turn ecological risk assessment. Ecological risk assessment. We also have monitoring of what? The waste, and we also have toxicology. These are the broad range of the categories that we come across in the case of the public health concern as well as the engineering aspects. This environmental engineering plays an important role between the doctors as well as the engineers. They are the bridging gap for the doctors and engineers. For example, let us take, if any person has been diagnosed with a bacteria which is causing typhoid, or maybe if you have any malaria and all, so therefore how do they go for diagnosing it? First they are going to take the sample, they go for testing it in a laboratory, given some set of the procedures, they obtain the results, you get it, and doctors, upon analyzing the test results, he will suggest some of the tablets or maybe a prescription, so that you need to take this sort of the course of the tablets or maybe any other syrups and all. Finally, after taking the complete course, you will be recovered from the any of the injuries or maybe from the diseases or any other things. This is the one thing for a one single person. See, for one set of a single person, if you have this much kind of an intervention, then what about in the case of environment? Therefore, the quality wise or maybe the quantification major thing that you come across is related to the Environmental Engineering Laboratory. I am stating that once again only for your syllabus water, water quality, wastewater assessment, but in addition to this you are going to have some of the demo experimentation as well as one or two software packages which will be run among for your members, so that you people also become familiar and you can utilize it for the project work also. Now, I think you have got to know how does the environmental laboratory deals with not only water or wastewater, air, noise as well as mitigation, microbial system, ecological system, and for the environmental impact assessment it is nothing but the documentation of the environmental analysis by the analysis through the aid of the developmental projects and whatever the significant impacts that is being coming across, whether it is a positive impact or negative impact that is being done through this analysis or an assessment. That mainly is also involved with respect to the social, because environment means mainly it is a society itself only, social as well as we also have a cultural impacts. These are the two things. Whenever you go for the development of the bridges, dams or any other things and all, you need to take care of all these sorts of the systems. So, if you have an interference, so therefore system tends to be in non-equilibrium condition, therefore all the sorts of the problems arises. So, it leads to difficulty in handling all these things. So, therefore, it has to comply with respect to the rules and regulations. What are those things that you are going to study mainly in the Environmental Engineering Laboratory? Let us get to know one by one. First and the foremost thing in the Environmental Engineering Laboratory, we have four set of the sequences like what we come across like in the management: plan, do, check and act. Similarly, we also have the laboratory. What is that? Planning means it is for the monitoring itself only. Okay, what are the major things that you come across? Means first set of the thing, it is you need to understand the problems or maybe the pollution sources. Whatever you are going to take the system, whether it may be a natural water system, artificial courses, or maybe in the case of the wastewater treatment systems also, maybe not only for the municipal, even for the industrial also. You need to understand what is the pollution sources, and that is what we call it as an objective for an environmental engineering laboratory. Engineering, as I have stated, that it mainly deals with respect to the proper planning, execution, designing and application of all the scientific knowledge in the present to come across the solving of the unknown problems. Okay, engineering is mainly meant for that. based on the designing aspects, based on the technicality, considering the various factors and all, we go for analyzing the problems and giving in the generating in the form of the report. So therefore, the objective is to understand the pollution sources. When you understand the pollution sources, you need to go for the next step that we come across is how to quantify it. Quantify, or what we call it as a quantification. Next thing, you need to determine even the quality. Quality is a major concern. Quality with respect to the what? With respect to the water. Quality with respect to the what? With respect to the air. Quality with respect to, if you are going to take in the case of the groundwater, yes, there also. Soil, yes, even there also. Land pollution. But these two we can go for it. Difficult to quantify, as well as the quality of the soil we can determine, but quantification it becomes very much tougher in nature. So understand, quantify, so quality, all those things and all, physical, chemical or biological, that I will be going to speak it in the later aspects. So pollution sources, when they have been identified, you need to quantify. Quantify means you need to take a representative. The taking of a representative, we call it as a sampling. We call it as a sampling, or in general terms. Now you have the coronavirus spreading to the communities. How are they going to go for testing it? Is it not they need to quantify it? Similarly, if any bacteria is present in the human body, how do they go for quantifying and how to reduce their impacts upon the fast growing part, because you know that the bacteria division is always in terms of n2 power n. One bacteria will be divided into 2, 2 next to 4, next it has been growing to 8 and so on. So 2 power n. So in this particular cases what happens, there is a lots of divisions, lots of problems. Therefore you need to understand how to go for the quantification. You need to take the sample has been taken, but how to test it? So what is the quality or any other things and all, that is a concern, isn't it? Whether the person has any other problems and all, you need to go for quantifying it. The sampling as well as even the analysis leads to the quality. Okay, this analysis may be physical analysis only that you need to go for it, or through the chemical means, or maybe through the biological analysis. You also have a simulation as a tool for analyzing the impacts, that we call it as a quality of air, because in the newspaper and all you can able to see quality of the water is bad. Kaveri river has D, or maybe it is being suggested that it is completely contaminated, not fit for direct drinking purpose. If it is in the categorized in the form of the A, B and C, what are those and all? That comes into the next stage. After the analysis, you need to say that how do you going to check whether there is any other significant impact is there. So therefore, understand the pollution sources, quantify, quantity as well as the quality of that. Finally, after the analysis, you need to come up with the significance. Okay. So therefore, what is the significance of that pollutants? How to go for the treatment and all? So after this analysis, you come across the next stage. It is related to in the form of the report. Significance. How the report is also being generated? Mainly, significance is stated with respect to the laws or maybe the acts which is being given up by the State Pollution Control Board or maybe in terms of a central pollution control board directed by Ministry of Environmental, Forestry and Climate Change. Okay. So what does this report it consists of? Mainly the significance, it has a report whether it is completely, it has a positive impacts or maybe a negative one based upon the standards. We have to go for the verification. Only after the complete verification, so therefore whatever the laws or the standards which have been set by this, some particular pollution if you are going to take it, it has to be reported. That means a part of a documentation is to be done. Whatever the analysis being done, it has to be in terms of a report. Then next sort of the things that we come across is related to the review of an alternatives. Or what we call it as any suggestions, or what we call it as a comments to be imbibed in documentation. I have not come across in depth also. This is the framework that we have in our Environmental Engineering Laboratory. And one more thing I need to mention for you people, whatever the virtual lab is being conducted in the later on aspects when it is being come across in the physical part where you are going to conduct the experiment itself only, you need to come up with complete data and information. Otherwise, it will not be helpful for you people, rather it will be disrupting whatever the scenarios or the framework that we have done. This is the requirement for a complete engineer. If not, is not meant to be an engineer itself only. Okay. So therefore, objectives is mainly to understand, to quantify what is the impact of the pollution. So check whether with respect to how much amount of the pollutants have been generated, with respect to the sources, how they have been generated, what is the reason for the cause of the pollution, whether the sources, if you are going to categorize it. So understanding the pollution sources may be categorized as either the point sources as well as the non-point part of the sources. What are the point as well as the non-point source of the pollution, if you are going to think? Environmental studies is the prerequisite. Along with this, knowledge of water supply and treatment engineering, basics that you have come across in the engineering chemistry, as well as you need to remember the concepts that you are studying in the wastewater disposal also. Therefore, whatever the pollutant means, if you take in the case of the wastewater itself only, if you discharge the water directly into the Kaveri river, what happens? The quality of the water, it tends to have certain effects or an impacts. What does it impacts? Does it impacts with respect to the physical quality, chemical or biological? Yes, it has a complete impacts on physical, chemical as well as even the biological characteristics also. Next important thing it is, point sources means where you know the point of origin of the pollution. Non-point sources means it is very difficult to quantify where the source of the origin has taken place. Very difficult to say that. For example, let us say a group of industries which are letting the pollutants into the Yamuna river. That has already happened in the case of the Delhi. You can see the Taj Mahal or Agra region, that is where the Yamuna river flows. Earlier people used to drink the water and they have reverend and treat it as a sacred. But why? What is the reason? Now it has been polluted. It is mainly because of the lethargic as well as unscientific practices of the disposal. Because of the unscientific method or the practices of the disposal, they have rendered a huge problem or a blunder to the society. When they have rendered the huge problem or the blunder to the society, then who has to take care? These people have to take care about this. In order to take care, what are the things or the steps to happen? All these things has to happen. Otherwise, they will be going to close off the industries itself only. So, the trend which is being coming across in learning the Environmental Engineering Laboratory, it is not just only for reading up for the syllabus sake, go to the examination, write, vomit all this, whatever the procedure that you have by-hearted and then get the marks. That is not the thing. No way. Whatever the knowledge that you have gained, how to apply it, how to analyze it, how to come up with a solution, that is the greatest part that you are going to yield when you learn the Environmental Engineering Laboratory. Getting my point clear for this? And coming on to the next thing, it is quantify means quantification. So, quantification, there are different sets based upon the statistical surveying also you come across, there are different sorts of the quantification. In that, sampling is one thing. Why we have adopted as a sample or maybe sampling means, normally if you take in the case of the water or wastewater, any other things, or maybe if you take a solid waste itself only, you need to take a representation. Representation means collection of small volume of the material, whether maybe in a liquid form or it may be in a semi-solid or a solid form itself only. Take the sample and then analyze it. After analyzing it, you come across for the complete assessment that is being carried out for this. Why we have to take the sample means, you cannot bring the whole river into your lab and then you can test it. That is a foolish idea. Instead of that, you need to take a representation. The representation of the collection of a volume in a particular manner, we call it as a sample. The procedure which is being followed or the process that is being followed, we call it as a sampling. Okay. So, there is an interrelationship between the sampling that you have studied in your mathematics and here in environmental engineering also. Okay. Sampling term is explained in a different manner also. Okay. There are two major categories that we come across in the sampling phenomena. What are those that we have to understand it in a proper manner? So, sampling, if you are going to take, we have two set of the categories. One is related to manual sampling as well as you also come across for mechanical sampling. Whatever the material that you have taken, either maybe in the case of your concrete or cement, you might have tested. Have you tested the whole cement bag? No, only small quantity that you have taken. Similarly, in the case of the building material testing lab, similarly in the case of the soil lab also. Similarly, here also you have to take a representation and that you have to collect either through the manual means or through the mechanical means. Manual means obviously you go there and then collect it. Mechanical means through the aid of an instrument or an apparatus or maybe any of the machines that you need to collect the sample. That process is what we categorize as a mechanical sampling. Now, analysis how it is being done and all will be going to take up in the next later stages. Okay. Now, let me cover up in this class related to understanding the pollution sources and quantify as well as the quality also. Significance and all, it will be related to the later aspects, but 4 fundamental features: sampling, analysis, report making or the comparison of the standards, and then making the suggestions or the comments with respect to the documentation is an essential tool or a part for an environmental engineering laboratory, as well as for a civil engineer who is working in the field of public health concerns or water supply and sanitary engineering, solid waste management or municipal city corporation, so water board or maybe in the wastewater board itself only, and urban developmental activities. All these things has to be coming under this. So, in this particular regard, let us get to know what are the types of the pollutants that are being generated. Let us categorize it. Based upon the categorization, especially in the case of the water as well as maybe in the case of a groundwater, I will mainly discuss with respect to the sampling conditions and all. Okay. Now, if you come across for the quality, the term quality, it suggests that what kind of the material that you are going to use it, its longevity, its durability and all. So, you have come across the good requirements, good quality of the material, whatever the iPhones that you are going to take or cell phones that you take, it has to be of a better quality, more durability, battery and all these things. You have specifications of the requirements. Similarly, if you take any sorts of the civil engineering materials, wood, a timber, or maybe in the case of the fine aggregate, coarse aggregate and all, it has to meet some specifications. For concrete mix design also it has to meet specifications. Similarly, for here also in environmental engineering, whatever the water that you have collected or you have sampled or investigated, it has to be quantified properly, and then only you can provide a proper verified statement. Okay, or else what happens? It will not tend to be in a peaceful manner, it will be disrupted or it will be biased decision making process. Now, let us take up on for the significance. What is the significance in all? Whatever the pollutant that you are going to take it has certain significance. What is that? Some of the materials or maybe compounds, they are to be present in the water. If not, it will impair our human health itself only. Similarly, in such kind of a category itself only, in order to protect or to prevent or the mitigation measures what earlier I have stated, for that you need to analyze the significance. So, whether it is a negatively impacting or a positively impacted, whether it is within the limit or crossing above the limit or the standards. That kind of the procedure has to be followed, that we call it as a report making significance commentary analysis. Finally, you need to have the alternatives. So, what are the things that you need to suggest? If at all, if the concentration of any pollutant has greater than the standard limits, I think you have come across water quality standards and then wastewater or maybe effluent disposal standards. All these concepts mainly related to this particular aspect itself only. Okay. So, therefore, in this particular set of the classes, I have explained only the normal features related to the sampling conditions, analysis, report and standards that you need to make. In the next part of the class, let us take upon what kind of the sampling is also being adopted. Normally, there are three distinct type of the sampling. One we call it as a grab sampling, means you need to grab the sample at a time itself only, irrespective of the whatever it may be. Next, you have composite type of the sampling. The term composite means the grab samples taken over a period of a regular intervals, we call it as a composite sampling. Integrated sampling, the combination of the grab as well as the composite samples will lead to a special category or the type of the sampling known as integrated sampling. What are those things? I think let us get to know in the next part of the classes. Till then, for following the analysis part also, how do you going to analyze it, whether you go for using it in terms of any tools or machineries, or maybe you have any other instrument also, or you have any the chemical analysis part. Okay. These are the major things to be taught in this part of the laboratory, as well as in addition to that we need to have a value based type of an education here, because ethics and morality plays a very important role in preserving and maintaining harmony in the society. With that thought, please remember all these concepts. Till then, stay tuned for it again, and we shall meet up in the next part of the class. I hope you might have understood the concept. Once again, I welcome back to the session 2 of Environmental Engineering Laboratory. The session 2 of the Environmental Engineering Laboratory mainly covers the conceptual framework. Okay? What is meant by the conceptual framework? Whatever the previous class I have discussed, whether how to take the pollutants into the laboratory via sampling procedure, mainly adopted either through the manual sampling process or maybe due to the automated, what we call it as a mechanical type of the sampling process. In next part, I have to define what is meant by a sampling, how it is being done, and what is the basis of the sampling. The term sample in the previous class, as I mentioned, that is a representative of the material based on its collection in a small volume. That means whatever the material, it may be a substance itself only, either it may be a liquid or semi-solid or completely solid in nature, that has to be taken from the overall mass or overall volume in nature. Okay? That particular sort of the collection which is to be representing the real system. Sometimes whatever the samples that we have collected doesn't seems to match with respect to the real system. Why? What is the reason? That means they have a relative error in nature. Due to the relative error, what happens? Whatever we go for analysis in the laboratory tend to give us dubious type of the results, or which are slightly erroneous or deviating from the original path. Therefore, in this regard, we need to take care regarding to the sampling conditions. Now, let us get to know conceptual framework. Conceptual framework is mainly basis of plan, do, check, act, because in an engineering part, you need to have environmental management systems in computing any of the quality of the material. For example, if you are going to take the pipe, how the corrosion is being caused in the water pipelines or maybe in the wastewater pipelines, how to reduce it. Similarly, whatever the water that you go for, using it for the concrete mix designing purpose, whether does it imparts any sorts of an rigorous reactions causing efflorescence or maybe the splitting up of the concrete either in the form of the segregation or maybe the bleeding, or does it affects the workability condition. Similarly, we have another set of the things, especially whenever the metal is being contact with respect to the salty type of the water, which has more sort of conductivity. Therefore, these are all the critical questions that we come across into day-to-day life activities. Not only for the civil aspect, it is also for the different industrial aspects, covering it may be even from the starting of the residential, commercial, as well as industrial establishments, even for the recreational facilities or maybe any of the research labs that you are going to take it. Each and everything has to be properly disposed. What should be properly disposed? Whatever the material that has obtained as a byproduct, or which we are going to call it as a refuse or a waste. Now, this conceptual framework mainly consists of knowing the fundamental principles, then afterwards sampling conditions, and then you need to go for analysis. After the analysis, you need to go for assessment. After the assessment, then completely the suggestions So this cycle is based on the hierarchy that we call. When only you understand the fundamental principles, you can go for what kind of the sampling to be done and at what time the analysis has to be done. How the assessment after analyzing in the laboratory and all, how are you going to assess whether there is a significant impact or not? Suggestions, that means any alternatives that you are going to give for it, so that in order to see the whatever monitoring process is to be taking place, or maybe to check the quality of the concerned water or wastewater. Now let me take up the sampling as a first part. Sampling, it represents the two types, one is the automatic as well as even the manual sampling. Coming on to the types of the sample, we have different types. I take over for here. Types, there are three types. One is grab sample, second one is related to composite sample, and third one is integrated samples. And that term both together we call it as sampling analysis. The samplings is based upon the different types depending upon the conditions, where which particular sort of waste that you are going to take it, either maybe in the terms of an water or a pollutant, or maybe in the case of the wastewater or a solid waste itself, or maybe even in the case of the hazardous waste also. Next thing that you come across here, grab sample, it represents collection of the samples only once at a time, only once at a time. That kind of the sample we call it as grab sample. Usually in environmental engineering practices, when the rate of the pollutants are being varying in nature, so therefore at one particular instance of a time, we are going to take it only at one period of the time, that we call it as the grab sample. Composite sample means if the sampling process is being continued, the collection is being continued continuously or maybe in a repeated intervals of a time, we call it as a regular intervals of time. Regular intervals of the time, then that kind of the sampling process we call it as composite type of sampling. Next, we come across integrated sampling. Before going to the integrated sampling, I need to make a note here. Regular intervals of a time means either on a hourly basis or on a daily basis or even on a weekly or monthly basis. This kind of the sampling we call it as composite sampling. The composite sampling has another one more feature, that means if you take the sample at a regular intervals, that is one thing. Next, integrated sample means combination of the grab and the composite samples, we call it as an integrated type of the sampling. This is majorly carried out in the case of the lakes. Okay, grab sampling is also carried out maybe for collection of the water in the canals and all like that. Composite sampling is also applicable. More part of the things, if you need to get the precise work and all, therefore you need to go for the integrated type of the sampling approaches. But which that you are going to come across, whether you adopt through the manual basis or through the mechanistic basis, depending upon the feasibility conditions. Feasibility means accessibility. If the collection of the sample is at your nearest point, then it is okay, fine, not at all a problem. If you find difficult to sample it, you cannot go where the places are completely inaccessible in nature, therefore you need some mechanism for collection. That kind of the sampling we come across either an automated or a manual type of the sampling. Normally, Sampling, you have the collection also. What are the collection bases? That I will be going to explain when I am going to take the constituents or the parameters. So, this fundamental principles is mainly guarded for the knowing of all this constituents or the parameters which are being present in the water, or maybe in the case of the wastewater, whether it may be a natural systems or maybe the man-made systems, sampling process is being completely carried out. Do not think that sampling is carried only for the natural systems. Even in the case of the industrial effluent treatment plant, or maybe in the case of the wastewater or in a water treatment plant, a separate laboratory setup has to be made, and then and there itself only on a daily part of a basis the results are to be monitored. So that whatever the quality of the effluent, they have to be maintained in par with or in compliance with respect to the water quality standards set by Central Pollution Control Board or State Pollution Control Board. There are different engineering organizations, especially in the environmental engineering organization. One is for the Central Public Health Environmental Engineering Organization. Second one is Ministry of Urban Resource, that is Urban Development. And another you come across is mainly related to the NERI, National Environmental Engineering Research Institute, and in addition to that we have so many policy and the decision making concern institute which are also being present for in India as well as over the world. Over the world we have UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, WHO, World Health Organizations, and whatever the acts that is being coming across, either maybe a Water Act or maybe Air Act, maybe any Noise Pollution Control Act, everything comes under the guiding basis of the knowing of the conceptual framework as well as the fundamental principles. Now, I need to go for collection of the samples. In what way the collection has to be done? Collection has to be done based upon the type of the constituents that are being present. Now, before collection, I need to explain what are the constituents, so that you can have to know when and where to collect, in what form you need to collect, and what not to collect. Okay? So, let us go for remembering the constituents of the water as well as the wastewater. I think you might have remembered these concepts. Now, let us get to know. Constituents or the parameters in water and wastewater is broadly categorized into three. Maybe we have an additional fourth one also, I will be explaining in the later words. We have a physical characterizations, physical characteristics, then we have chemical characteristics, and then biological characteristics. Collection has to be based upon this, knowing the physical, chemical, biological characteristics. We have a special category called as radioactive parameters. And in addition to that, we have a sub part in the chemical categorization. I will be explaining or taking one by one. Now, I think maybe in the previous sort of the water supply and treatment engineering, I have explained some of the concepts related to the physical. What are those? Let us recap it once again. Let us remember it. So, physical characteristics, one able to sense through our sense organs. Okay? Either in the form of the visualization, it may be related to the color or maybe odor, it may be a taste, and even the presence of the temperature. In addition to that, you have the presence of the turbidity, and then solid content and oil content. All these things comes under the category of physical parameters. Sometimes they include the pH also to be a physical parameters, but I don't think so if pH to be retained in the physical. There are certain reasons why we need to treat it under the chemical parameters itself only. So these are the physical set of the parameters. Color, it has to be colorless, odorless, tasteless, temperature should be in the normal range, turbidity it has to be minimal, solid content has to be in a minimal manner. That is for the water. What about in the case of the wastewater? Wastewater mainly contains 99% of water and remaining 1% of the solids. To remove that 1% of the solids, we need to take huge number of the task to removing it, because water is a universal solvent, it dissolves each and every impurities. Solids can also be categorized as suspended solids which are being suspended in nature, dissolved solids, so one which is being dissolved in nature that you cannot be identified visibly, that you need to analyze it. What kind of analysis I will be going to take upon. Next thing that you come across is related to the oil content. That means based upon the separation or the density content, you can see the oil floating over the water. Maybe the spillage of any of the oil or the grease content, you can be able to see it has been tending to travel across the surface of the water itself only, or it has been retained. How do you going to remove it? So these are all the critical parameters which has a importance. Turbidity, obviously it is a measure of the colloidal or the suspended impurities hold together. So in that regard, we are going to classify it as a physical parameters. Next, in the chemical parameters, there are again distinct classifications. What are those? One we call it as an organic parameters, organic, and then we call it as inorganic. Again, we also come across a special category that we call it as the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides and all. So pesticides, herbicides, fungicides and insecticides, these are referred as toxic parameters. Okay. So let me take upon for organic as well as inorganic parameters. Organic parameters, again you can go for further classification, determination of the organic content, maybe in the formation of the carbon or maybe the hydrocarbon compounds. It includes aliphatic aromatic hydrocarbons, and it also contains biodegradable as well as non-biodegradable compounds. Non-biodegradable and degradable compounds. So this part of the organic content, everything we cannot go for analyzing 150 or 1000 compounds and all. We need to have one common sort of an consideration to determine the organic content, that we call it as an organic matter. Hence, the organic matter can be determined on the basis of degradability or non-biodegradability. Either serving test, we call it as chemical oxygen demand, we call it as COD, and biochemical oxygen demand, we call it as BOD. And DO serves as a basis for the test content, the dissolved oxygen content, to determine the organic matter. It is also having some critical importance. What are those importance? We need to come across here. Next, this is related to the organic matters. We also have some of the residual contaminants in the, we call it as organic residuals. Residual contaminants. Whatever the utilization, maybe in your homes and all, starting from the shampoo, soap, detergents, face wash, everything that we go for using, it is a chemical compound itself only. After all utilization, it enters into the waste stream. That waste stream has to be treated up. What are those things and all? If you are going to check any other shampoo sachet or maybe any other things that you go for utilizing it, it contains like micro beads or any other things and all. The microbeads are nothing but the plastic content that has been utilized for years together, and it has been powered and advertisement by so and so companies in the TV. So people go for utilizing it. One more thing it is, there is also a set of the organic waste that has been arising from the different industries, especially even in the case of the pharmaceutical industries and even food industries. They generate lots of biodegradable matters which are putrescible in nature. Therefore, the complete measurement can be done through the COD, BOD, DO. We also have the separate part of the determination of the phenols and all those things and all. Phenolic compounds, and then polyaromatic hydrocarbon, PAHC, like this. These are the important part of the compounds. Next thing that we come across is related to the inorganic compounds. What are those inorganic compounds? I will take up here. Inorganic. Again, in this inorganic, we have two sorts of classification. I have to classify here itself only. One, it is based on completely a metallic type of the inorganic, and then non-metal. Combination of this, we are going to call it as a ligand type of the compounds. We have it. Complex salts and all. It is present. Metal as well as the non-metal, they are being combined to form a complex salts. So metal compound, so there again we go for certain sort of classification. I don't go for the listing it. We call it as a heavy metals. What are those heavy metals and all? So metallic compounds, if you are going to take it as in heavy metals, you have scandium, titanium, vanadium, molybdenum, okay, and then you have iron, manganese, and then lead, zinc, so on, copper, chromium, and so on. I can go for listing it. Next, again non-metals, they are the salt contents, they are in the combination. Maybe whatever you come across, either maybe determination of the chlorine in the form of chloride, fluoride, sulfate, nitrate, then you also come across phosphate, and then nitrate, nitrogen. So NNO3, you have also come across the ammonia, okay. All the sorts of the determination, especially the nitrate and the phosphate, even you have the potassium which is coming in the sorts of metallic compounds. So these are the critical classifications that we come across in the case of the non-metallic type of the compounds, okay. And either you may have the combination of these two also, maybe we, what I call it as a ligand or all the sort of the compounds and all. I don't want to take up, only this much if you remember is enough for your curriculum. Next, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and insecticides, they are completely different type of the compounds. DDTs and all, dichloro, dibromo, trichloroethane and all. So tetrachloros, all those things and all, we call it a CCl3 and all, they come under this particular sort of the categories, okay. And something at times they are not biodegradable, they have to be chemically or thermally degraded. If you take in the case of the biological parameters, before moving to that, let me see anything that I have left it out. Obviously determination, you have in your curriculum or the syllabus, you have the determination of hardness content. pH already I have mentioned, that is hydrogen ion concentration. So for each and every aspect you can determine this hardness content combination. And then you also come across, after the hardness pH, you have the basic aspect that we go for studying, it is related to the acidity and then alkalinity. So for this I can also go for mentioning carbonate as well as bicarbonate also, because they are the major driving factors for acidity, alkalinity along with the pH. Next we have the determination of the chlorine optimum dosage, and in addition to this we also have the aluminum content. So like this, so on we have. So majorly we have to go for checking the quality of the water as well as the wastewater also. There are different types of the contaminants. To list it, there are maybe 45,000 compounds are also present. But all those things we cannot analyze in our laboratory, time is very short. Next, moving on to the biological parameters. I will go for taking it here itself only. Biological parameters. These biological parameters mainly consist, or maybe characterization can also be done based on the, we call it as a protozoa, bacteria, fungi, as well as even the virus, and then macroinvertebrates. For example, what is the protozoa? Either you can take it as even the amoeba, euglena. Presence of this maybe Vorticella or Cryptosporidium, we call it as like that. All these things and all, it is a protozoa. Carrier is the vectors, maybe in malarial diseases and all, the protozoa is only the major cause for all the decline in the WBC count, especially during the malarial conditions. Bacteria, there are different sorts of the bacteria, rod shape, cone shape type of the bacteria, and then you have helical or a spiral shape type of the bacteria and all. Normally we go for taking the E. coli test, and for your kind information we only going to stick on for E. coli test. To the determination we call it as multiple tube fermentation techniques, as well as we also have membrane filter technique. If you take in the determination of the fungi and all, so these are the other special categories. They are dependent upon the dead and decayed organic parts. From that they go for growing up. They utilize it and then they go for growing it up. That particular features can be determined through the pore plate method as well as the spread plate method. PPM, pore plate method, as well as spread plate method. Next, virus content. The one of the most important aspect that we have certain limitations in our environmental engineering laboratory is to determine the virus, because virus cannot be determined under this normal microscopic condition. It has to be determined through the scanning electron microscope as well as infrared type of an microscope is to be utilized for this, and the determination causages is mainly dependent in the microbiology laboratory, where they have the special features for the extraction of the virus and then determination which kind of the virus tends to be persisting and stringent in nature. Macroinvertebrates means in a biological environmental assay test and all, they go for utilizing it to determine what is the lethal dose or the concentration of the organisms that imparts toxicity in nature. So these are some of the critical importance. Macroinvertebrates, it includes the insect or maybe in the form of the worms, whatever the tapeworm or maybe the guinea worm diseases that is being caused. All those things you come under, get to know under this macroinvertebrates. So now, for your syllabus, which are the thing which is important? Physical parameters, chemical parameters are mainly important. So whatever I have listed, COD, BOD, dissolved oxygen concentration, pH, hardness, acidity, alkalinity, some of the determination of the treatment practices. So how much is the removal of the solid content by usage of the chemical things. How we can able to do it? Mainly you need to remember two things during the stages of the assessment, that we call it as unit operations as well as unit process. What is meant by unit process? Whatever the treatment is being adopted in water or maybe wastewater, the changes is brought by the addition of either the chemicals or maybe any of the biological substances. We call it as the component. And in next sort of the thing that you come across is mainly related to the biological one. Only the theoretical part will be shown in this virtual part of the laboratory. So determination of virus and all, I think I have previously explained during the online session in your 17CV64 class itself only, how it has been extracted and then taken. Now, when you know all the constituents and the parameters, then we have to know how to collect it. See, collection of the sample is also an skill. Simply we cannot go for collecting the samples like how we go across for it. For that particular instances, you require certain propagation measures and all. How to collect it, those samples and all? We have a sampling bottle either made up of a glass or maybe a polyethylene type of the plastic bottles. From that we go for collecting the different sorts of the samples. Sampling conditions is also prevailed in the case of the running water, maybe a waste stream, or maybe you have to collect it in the upstream as well as in the downstream. Either it may be a river or a channel, or it may be a canal, or maybe even in the case of the lake also you need to take the samples and all. So that whatever the things, especially acidic samples and all, you need to see that they should not tend to damage. So the particular aspect that you come here is mainly dependent upon which kind of the sampling procedure is being adopted for it. So meanwhile, these are the necessity aspect that you need to come across. Once again, I'll be going to come across what are the collection principles, preservation methods, and analysis part and assessment, and how do you go for suggesting it. So till then, stay tuned, and I'll be going to explain in the next part of this class. Okay, thank you.